and I want to share something. Dr. Bajago is he's a believer in Jesus, and I really prayed about, Lord, is this the time to reveal this? And I have. And Dr. Bajago, I apologize for I don't know, when I get a pronunciation in my mind, I stick with it until a year later, but I'll try and hit it right. The timing of this program, Doug and Joe and everyone listening, is so critical. I don't have the answers to, I only have the answers to that which is revealed. But I want to share this. 1 week ago, I got a call, Andrew, from basically one of the guys that was one of the first, if you will, in the Space Command who was on Mars, and he was on Mars as a warrior fighting stuff there. And he talked about having his mind wiped. My other friend, formerly with the NSA, talked about having his mind wiped. And then, obviously, the MIBs, Men in Black, even with the Spielberg presentation, there was always, if you will, the presentation of mind wipe. Do you find that you recall things now? Was that ever done to you, number one? And are you recalling things different times that are coming back to you?
Well, in terms of my time travel experiences in the early 70s, there was an attempt made when I left the project at the end of the summer of 1972 to suppress my memories essentially via torture. Basically, I had a tremendous headache, just an evacuating, terrible headache induced, while I was being spoken to in a kind of a hypnotic voice that this is what will happen. You'll have a terrible headache like this when you recall what you did in the project. But through force of will, basically through soul force and reliance on Almighty God, I defeated that. And therefore I brought forward through the balance of the rest of my life to this point memories of my time travel experiences. But then 10 years later, after serving from 1980 to 84 and going to Mars from 81 to 84 in the Mars Jump Room program, they were utilizing a reverse-engineered American version of the Soviet LIDA machine. That's L-I-D-A. It's an acronym for a Soviet term for that device. And they were very effectively suppressing or blocking our memories without using torture, but rather with using not the electronic dissolution of memory, but simply the electronic blocking of memory. So I only ended up recovering my Mars visitation memories when I was approached by my fellow jumpers, William Brett Stillings, Bernard Mendez, and William Whitecrow, who had also served with me back in the day when I was a child. He was actually my martial arts instructor when I was time traveling for DARPA in the early 70s. So had it not been for the connectivity of the internet and the ability to reach out to others and contact them after decades of not being in touch with them, I don't think any of the four of us would have remembered with the certainty and the clarity that we now have what happened in the Mars program. But I'm absolutely certain, based on our hundreds of hours of discussions together, that we are not deluding each other because we have verified very esoteric facts and shared them with each other and used each other to get around those memory blocks.
It's almost as we're seeing even if you will, the neuropharmaceuticals and the electronic blocking of synapses. I mean, that's even in the news in the past couple months where they're talking about getting rid of the part of the brain that is a conscience or the God center of our brain. The supernatural evil. Did you perceive a change or experience a change where there were some really good men in the program, as your father who was a believer in Jesus Christ and others, and then was there I guess you'd say an envelope of evil that came in and pretty much took over the program that it now exists under?
I wouldn't say that evil won. I would say there was certainly a dichotomy between the really high-caliber people who sort of embodied the greatest generation, men like Dr. Harold M. Agnew at the Los Alamos National Labs, Dr. Sterling Colgate, my father, who again was one of the nation's experts on teleportation. They were really good people. And, if you think of, for example, let me just use my dad as an example. My dad was born in 1923 on the kitchen table in Summit Hill, Pennsylvania, an impoverished Irish-American and Polish-American coal mining town in the anthracite coal mining country of eastern Pennsylvania. He was eating 2 meals a day of apple butter and toast during the Depression as a 10-year-old. He was 130 pounds when he served as a combat medic and ambulance driver in World War II in France and Germany. He only became an engineer after going back to the coal mines after the war as a result of the GI Bill. He got an engineering degree from Lehigh University in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania. And then he was invited into the defense technical community and its secret projects as a result of his essentially his expertise as a physicist, an inventor, an electrical engineer. And yet he went from those origins to making a material contribution to the advent of time travel, not even as a mid-career professional, beginning essentially when he was still in his early 40s. So I think my dad is sort of an example of the quality of the individuals that generation was producing and how far they went from their roots if we then evaluate what they were doing as mid-career professionals. So I was very, very cosmically privileged to be a direct participant in the development of new forms of human functioning in the universe that great generation was achieving. And I think, in fact, was the greatest feat that they achieved, even more grand than the lunar landing, for example, or some of the medical advances that they were responsible for developing. But there was an evil faction in the program that had no compunction, for example, about electromagnetically shocking us by 1971 when we would teleport from New Mexico back to New Jersey so that we wouldn't talk about the teleportation technology. There was clearly a faction that not only had no compunction about utilizing us as children in the program, but even essentially abusing us in the process. So there was a dichotomy. Now, do I think that was a kind of a satanic incubus? It might have been. I think more is coming out about the satanic cult in the world. I mean, if you look at the recent interviews of Ronald Bernard, the Dutch banker, he literally provides gripping testimony about the fact that at the highest levels of banking, you have to become not only a Satanist, but a Satanist willing to ritualistically sacrifice children to remain safe and advance in the field. So there could have been a satanic connection to the abusive and sort of hard-hearted people in the program. I don't think necessarily that was true, and I don't think necessarily that the evil faction won. But I think one of the reasons I'm speaking out is, after all these years, we really don't know who is in control of the technology. It may, for example, be a private faction like the Carlyle Group or some corporate cutout that was created as a way of essentially taking the technology private and utilizing it for nefarious or for selfish purposes. I'm really speaking out as a member of the project because, after all, DARPA was created, its congressional mandate was to prevent military surprise. So in one way I'm speaking out because if we don't create a system of global teleportation led and administered by the United States and its allies, some other country or terrorist group or organized criminal network can, and they can use it to enslave us. So I'm essentially still on the project now as an activist lawyer who was in the project to prevent military surprise and to protect this great country and also to protect good people from the evil people that could exploit this technology if we don't standardize it now.
I asked you yesterday on the phone if you were familiar with Ben Rich, the former head of Lockheed Skunk Works, I think the second director of it. They call him Mr. Father of Stealth Technology, and he made this statement. I want to read it and then ask you to comment on it. We already have the means to travel among the stars, but these technologies are locked up in black projects, and it would take an act of God to ever get them out to benefit humanity. Anything you can imagine, we already know how to do it. We now have technology to take ET home. No, it won't take someone's lifetime to do it. There is an error in the equations. We know what it is. We now have the capability to travel to the stars. And then the last thing I'll read and then get you to comment, there are two types of UFOs, the ones we build and the ones they build. Now, obviously, there was a great effort made to discredit Rich, but when you talk about people that are having, if you will, the last breaths of their life or the last moments of their life to kind of clear their conscience, that's a pretty famous guy to be making those statements, because even on his deathbed, are you familiar with James Goodall?
No, but I'm familiar with Ben Rich. I didn't meet him, but I'm familiar with that really telling statement he made. I can say this, that there were 3 defense contractors on the Mars jump room program: Parsons, Hughes, and Lockheed Skunk Works. In fact, I received specialized training over at Lockheed Skunk Works in the early part of the summer of 1981, before my first jump to Mars in July of 81. They had me in a kind of a videodrome type setup where I was given a gun. Basically, it was a proxy for a firearm. And I stood in a room, and they were bringing videos up in front of me, behind me, and on my left and right to sort of sensitize me or give me almost sort of Pavlovian condition to look around for predators on the horizon and even close. And there was a woman with a very kind of affecting, thick British accent saying, "Now look 90 degrees to your left. What's there?" And I did that for several hours. So when I got to Mars and I had the status of being essentially a guard of my fellow civilian visitors, I had been conditioned to look at 90 and 180 degree angles constantly. I was doing it like every 15 and 30 seconds, really as, let's say, the guard in a military detachment would. So I can connect Lockheed Skunk Works, Ben Rich's very company, to the Mars program. And I think if you examine or compare his claims against mine, my claims are really encompassed by his. He essentially corroborates me, because he's talking about our capacity to go to the stars. All I've described is a device that you walked into that was virtually identical with an elevator in a corporate office building. In fact, it was the dual use of the elevator within the core part of that Hughes building in El Segundo. And we checked in on the 5th floor and then went back in the elevator and it went up to the top floor, which is the 8th floor of that building. And after about 5 minutes, lights would start flashing, and the elevator would morph from a box-like structure into a cylindrical one. And then after about 10 minutes of that, back into a box-like structure. And when the far wall opened up, we were in the sub-basement of one of 7 or 8 U.S. facilities on the Red Planet. So imagine walking into an elevator and going to another planet. That's how advanced we were in the early 1980s. That was 35 years ago. I'm 56 years old. I first went to Mars when I was 19. Okay, in the summer of 1981, I was almost 20. Okay, so there has been essentially a multi-generational cover-up of these technologies, and the space program has been far more advanced and has involved far more people than the American people were told. And because they've been footing the bill, and our model of government is supposed to be based on the consent of the governed, I'm speaking out because the American people deserve to know that our uniquely great American civilization developed time travel by 1970 and was utilizing one of those forms of time travel to reach Mars by the late 1970s. I was the first American child to Tesla teleport, but 10 years later, I was by no means the first American to serve in the jump room program. There were hundreds of people who were going. I'm just one of the handful who have essentially risked our lives to speak out, because the American people deserve to know what we have accomplished. And Mars visitation is one of those great feats of our uniquely American civilization.